Hello there, and welcome back to the Casual Fridays podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns, and I'm really happy to be here with you again. Even though today is not Friday, it is actually Saturday, owing to some electricians taking apart my whole office yesterday and some other obligations that I had yesterday. I just was not able to record an episode here yesterday. So I'm here today on Saturday, pulling some Saturday hours, rolling up our sleeves and getting it done. So thank you for being here. I want you to know that I am just thrilled to be here with you. In this Casual Fridays podcast, whether it happens on Friday or Saturday, the goal here is to help you to understand that there are, mind training exercises that will cultivate a sense of not only well-being for you and help you to manage stressful situations and help you to relate to people in your life a little bit differently, a little bit more deeply, with a little bit more, acceptance and tolerance and all kinds of things that can help in all areas of the life, right? But we talk about bringing this stuff into work in this podcast because if we cultivate these skills in work, which they are skills, right? Acceptance is a skill. Being kind is a skill. Having compassion and empathy are skills. And as we can cultivate these skills within the workplace where we spend most of our time and with the same people all the time, right? Well, then these skills wind up permeating every area of our life. And not just at home, but even when you're at the grocery store and the person who's ringing you out, you're going to relate to that person differently. You're going to relate to being stuck in a traffic jam differently, and every other area of your life as well. And so I'm really happy you're here. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. All right. So over the last few years that I've been doing this professionally is now 4 years, just over 4 years, about a month or so. Actually, just about a month to the day since 4 years plus 1 month to the day that I became certified and started doing this on a professional level. And in that time, I've had a wonderful opportunity to work with a lot of different organizations, work organizations. I've worked with everything from law firms and a bar association from the state of Ohio. I've also worked with, various departments of for-profit corporations and also with a lot of nonprofit organizations. And one thing that has become very clear to me, and it's really, I hear this all the time from nonprofit people, right? But I think even though you don't hear it so much from the corporate, for-profit folks, it's there in equal measure, I believe, right? And what I'm talking about is the idea that there's a sense that we have to wear many hats, right? That we become spread thin and we have to, function in many different roles all at the same time. Right. Now, again, this is something that's sort of baked into nonprofit, right? Because nonprofit is by default, always going to be working with a very limited budget, right? But even in for-profit organizations like advertising agencies and law firms and all kinds of other different, corporations out there, there is this sense of trying to do more with less is the corporate mantra that you hear a lot, right? And what that means is just like the people at nonprofits feel like I have to wear many hats, that comes through in all areas of work and in all professions, in all sort of avenues of employment. And so I want to talk about that today, okay? Because here's the thing, right? Whether you do feel like you have to wear many different hats, or if you just feel like you are, just overwhelmed with the volume of work that you have to do. Because maybe it's not a matter of wearing different hats. Maybe it's just something like as a lawyer, right? Lawyers are, 100% always feel like they're overwhelmed, right? Because there's just so much to do. It's not that they're being a lawyer and also being something else, but it's just that the volume of work is such that it becomes overwhelming, right? And so again, this is true for just about any work that we can do on some level. Even as a coach, I feel this sometimes. And so the important thing to recognize, and this is really going back to the very, very basics of the work that I do, right? Now, let me just mention real quick, if you don't mind, a little aside here, right? A lot of times I've always called, and until very recently, I've exclusively called my work the work of mindfulness, because it is, right? Mindfulness, as a sort of, clinical definition, is paying attention on purpose in the present moment without judgments. Okay, that's all it is, right? But yet, when you hear that word mindfulness or, mindful, right, it tends to either push us towards one or the other of either a mysticism of some kind, like, okay, mindfulness is for monks who shave their heads and live in robes and give up all worldly possessions and eat one meal a day, right? Or it maybe gets sort of wrapped up into sort of the pop psychology and becomes just sort of a buzzword for, meditation and calming ourselves down and stuff like this, right? But neither of these is really true of what we're talking about and what really mindfulness means. So I tend to avoid that word these days. And instead, I talk about mind training, which is really to say attention training. Because as we train our attention, as we cultivate that ability to pay attention on purpose in the present moment without judgment, that's really what we're doing. It's just like going to the gym and building muscles, right? In fact, a lot of people do call it the mindfulness muscle, right? Which is that ability, which I would contend is really the muscle of attention, right? But now, of course, you can pay attention, right? But if you're constantly judging things and you're constantly maybe resisting the reality that you're seeing as you're paying attention, right? Then it becomes something other than what we're talking about here, right? And so what I want to talk about today is this concept of feeling spread thin and feeling like we have to wear different hats and feeling overwhelmed, right? Because when we get into that feeling, when we start to sense that nature of just being like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do here? How am I ever going to get through this? It's all too much, right? Well, that essentially is what we're describing as the stress response, right? And the stress response, and we're going to do a whole episode on stress, probably many episodes on stress down the line a little bit, but real simply, stress is a transaction. Okay, or the result of a transaction, right? It's the end, either a debit or a credit, either it's above zero or below zero in this transaction of our experience. And what that means is that what we're going through, if we believe we don't have the inner resources to handle it, then we're going to experience stress. That's the transaction. It's a transaction between what we're experiencing and what we believe we can handle. And so as we feel like we're wearing many hats and we feel like we're becoming overwhelmed and, oh my gosh, it's all too much, that's really inviting that stress response, or that's sort of the pathway into that stress response. The stress response is not your fault. It's nobody's fault. I mean, it's not something we choose to do. It's just a reaction of our body. But it is very much reliant on or very much caused by the perception of what's going on, right? It's not that something is too difficult. It's how we believe it is too difficult. I would use, to illustrate this, an emergency room nurse. Okay, emergency room nurses are people just like you and me. They have hearts and lungs and kidneys and stomachs and intestines and all the different muscles and cardiovascular system and the whole endocrine system and the whole lymphatic system, the whole thing, just like you and me. Right? Every morning a nurse gets up and he or she gets out of bed and hopes to be well and wants things to work out and wants to be happy and wants to be healthy, just like you and me. But yet there are some people who can be emergency room nurses for years and years and years and years. And then there's other people like me who, if I was in that situation for 10 minutes, I would find the nearest desk to crawl under and hide until it was over, right? I mean, that's not necessarily true of me now, but it was certainly before I started these practices to help manage the stress, right? So the thing is that what I'm trying to get at here is that the difference between, the emergency room nurse and someone like me from 10 years ago has nothing to do with actually what's happening out there, right? The emergency room's the emergency room for everyone. The difference is how much I believe I am able to handle it as compared to how much the nurse believes that he or she is able to handle it. And so, of course, a lot of with nurses, of course, a lot of this is included or involves rather, training, right? They go through a lot of years of school to become this, and during that schooling, they are led to understand what to expect. Right. Whereas somebody like me, I've never been in that situation before. I've never had any training around this. I don't know what to expect. And of course, it would be complete chaos and mayhem to me, and it would become very overwhelming. The chaos and the mayhem doesn't change based either on me or the other nurse. It's how we are able to perceive what is happening. I hope that makes sense to all of you, because this is really important. If you have any questions about this or anything else, I invite you to get a hold of me. art@artburnscoaching.com. I am here to answer whatever questions you might have, and I answer every single email that comes into that address. Now, that said, when we go into that stress response, when we feel like I'm wearing too many hats, or I'm way too overwhelmed, I'm too tired to deal with this, I need a break, right? When we start feeling those things, right, and that again is the stress response. That's sort of, the stress response, promotes those thoughts, if you will, right? And when that happens, we tend to sort of leave the present moment, if you will. Right? We start thinking about, what's the worst that's going to happen here? Or how am I ever going to get out of this? Or who's to blame for all this? Who dropped the ball here? Who made this happen? Whose fault is this? Even if it's even if I'm looking at what did I do wrong, right? But as you can see, as I'm describing these various notions that might come into mind during the stress response, during this feeling of overwhelm and wearing too many hats and being spread too thin, really these are all things that have absolutely nothing to do with the here and now. Right? Like thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to get through this? How am I going to survive through the rest of this week? That's not now. Yeah, you're talking about days away. If I'm thinking, oh my gosh, whose fault is this? How did I get to this point? Now I'm way behind. I'm thinking about something from the past. Neither of these are here and now. And why is that important? I'm glad you asked. That's important because the resources that we have to handle whatever it is that we're tasked to handle, whether it be, wearing multiple hats, or doing the job of 3 different people, or bucking up against an impossible deadline, right? Whatever it is that we're endeavoring to do, and however that endeavor is sort of manifest and is influenced by the tension and everything else that we're experiencing, the thing that we forget in those moments, the things that we lose sight of in those moments, if we ever had sight of it to begin with, is that all of the resources that we possess, every single power that we have to handle whatever it is that we need to handle, all those resources exist right here, right now. Not on Friday, not last week, not last quarter, not in some indeterminate future, but right here, right now. This is where all that you are capable of doing is available to you. And this is the only reality, right? There's no, it's hard to even wrap our minds around sometimes, right? Because, we feel like, well, we got to plan for the future and we got to understand how we got here. And those things are true. Absolutely. But when we're planning for the future, we're planning right here, right now for the future. We're tapping into our organizational and our visualization and our logic skills right now to be able to determine that way forward, the thing that we're going to be able to do or not do, or accomplish or not accomplish. It's all happening right here, right now. And so in a very important way, when we're feeling that notion of feeling too spread thin, and we're all lost in the in the sea, we feel like we're a feather in a whirlwind, as the saying goes, right? We feel like we're just unmoored and ungrounded and just flying by the seat of our pants, as the term also is used oftentimes, right? In those moments, the most important thing that we can do, the most helpful and beneficial thing that we can do, is to come back into the present moment, is to come back into our resources. Okay? Now, again, it's very important to recognize that this is not just something that is like, you don't just put a Post-it note on the side of your computer saying, hey, come back to the present moment, right? Although that is helpful. Do that if you're so moved to do that, please do it, right? Because I as I teach people and coach people, I use Post-it notes a lot for I encourage the use of Post-it notes a lot to remind ourselves of this, right? However, the thing to understand is that in that moment that we are becoming, in the moment that we enter and become triggered in our stress response, that moment in which we are wearing all the different hats and being spread too thin, right? Once we enter that stress response, we no longer have access to that sort of memory to say, oh, wait, Art said be present. Don't forget that, right? And even seeing the Post-it note, it'll just like blur past us. We don't necessarily see that in the same way. Not necessarily. We don't see that in the same way as we would in a moment that we're not in the stress response. So that's why this has to become an innate skill, right? It has to become a habitual skillfulness. Something you don't have to think about. You don't have to remember. Because in the moments of stress, you're actually using, as I say, a completely different part of your brain. Completely different part. It's not like you literally do not have access to the same parts of your brain in stress versus not in stress. To put it very simply, right? And so what we must do then is, so before I get to that, one of the ways that you can look at this as becoming a habit or a habitual skill, if you will, right, is one of my favorite teachers, who was one of the first people I took a class with in my quest to become this mindfulness or this mind training coach, was a guy by the name of Dan Siegel, Dr. Daniel Siegel. He's an author of probably 10, 12, maybe 15 books, most of them like New York Times bestsellers. He's a teacher. He's was a head of a department, or is a head of a department at UCLA. Has his own institute called the Mindsight Institute. I mean, real powerful dude, right? And so in the first seminar that I attended in this work, right, it was online, and I was, dialed in, and I'm listening to every word that this guy's saying, right? And he said something that just drilled into my consciousness in a way that was like such an aha moment. And I want to share this with you. When we are able to practice, let's say, right? And I'm going to give you a practice in just a couple of minutes. It's going to help you to, I think I might have already covered this, but it's worth covering again, right? But this practice that helps us come back into the present moment where all of our resources are, no matter how many hats we're wearing, no matter how overwhelmed we are, all the resources that we could possibly ever draw upon are right here, right now. And when we practice coming into that, and I'm going to use for just as a general term, the word meditation, right? Because meditation is something that's not limited to, a guy or a lady sitting cross-legged doing something with their hands and, chanting or something like that. That's one little, very small sliver of what meditation looks like, right? Meditation is just paying attention. Right? And every time that the attention wanders off from the thing that we're attending to just bring it back. That's meditation. And that can be done on a city bus as well as it can be done in a yoga studio. All right. And that's where I work, right? I work on the city buses more than the yoga studios, right? And so it could be done in the office, it could be done anywhere and everywhere. Okay. So now that I've explained that, when we do that, right, when we perform that practice of meditation, and again, I mean, I've only named two forms of it. There's millions of ways that you can do meditation, right? Anytime we're doing it, though, what we're doing is we're attaining a state of meditation, right? Which is to say, a state of paying attention on purpose in the present moment without judgment. Okay. And don't worry about the how right now. Okay. Just worry about the what. Okay. I can teach you how. Just email me. I'll hook you up. Okay. And I'm going to give you a practice in just a couple minutes, right? But when we attain that state, right, of presence, let's say, right, or attending to the present is really what we should say, without judgment. When we attain that state, and we do so over and over and over and over, thanks to a form or a quality of the brain known as neuroplasticity, right? Which is to say that the neural pathways of the brain change as we continuously do this practice. So as Dan says, when we get into that state of meditation, or again, attending to the present moment, over and over and over, the state becomes a trait. It becomes the way we are. It becomes completely automatic, completely without any mental reminders, any post-its, anything. It just becomes automatic. The same way that one way I like to illustrate this, because most of the people listening to this drive a car, right? So try to remember back to the very first time you drove. You had your learner's permit and you were, maybe it was your parents or some friend or a cousin or somebody was sitting next to you in the car, or maybe a teacher, right? Driver's ed teacher, right? Or math teacher, who knows, right? But you got in that car the first time. And oh my gosh, how many things did you have to think about, right? There was the mirror, the seatbelts, the seat adjustment, the side mirrors, the all the different lights and gauges and everything in front of you, right? Including the wheel and the pedals and everything else that was going on. It felt very, very overwhelming to all of us. It necessarily should. I mean, it's a very complicated thing you're doing. You're driving this, thousands of pounds of steel down the road at 70 miles an hour. It should be complex. It should be like, holy crap, I got to think about this, right? But what happens now, right? I could toss you the keys to virtually any car. If you know how to drive standard shift, virtually any car in the world, I could toss you the keys and you could get in that car, turn it on, put it in gear and drive, right? And you're still doing the mirrors and everything else. It's all that stuff hasn't changed. The car is still the car. But your familiarity with that car is not, you don't have to sit there and think, okay, put the key in, turn it, make sure the mirrors, make sure my hands, none of that happens anymore. Because now driving is a trait of you. Like, to be comfortable in driving is a trait that is in your personality now. The only reason it's that way is because of the amount of times that you have driven a car. I.e., the amount of practice you've given driving a car. That you have gotten into the car so many times that state of being able to drive has become a trait of being able to drive. And so the ability to attend to the present moment is no different. No different at all. And this is the essence of what we're talking about. Okay. And so in those moments where you feel like you're wearing too many hats and you feel like you're spread too thin and it's all just so overwhelming, in that moment, this is the trait that is going to be able to ground you in the present moment and recognize that no matter how many hats I have to wear, there's only one thing I can be doing right now. There's only one thing I can be attending to right now. Now, little sidebar here again, little this digression, intentional digression, multitasking. All right, I'm going to add that to my list of episodes and do a whole episode about multitasking because it's a fallacy. There's no such thing as, I mean, yes, we can do many, many different things, but we don't do them in the way that we believe we do them, right? Like multitasking, like listening to somebody talk and writing an email at the same time is not really what we think it is, right? We're not able to attend to both of those things at the same time. So what we're doing is we're switching back and forth. Okay, because while you're typing the email, you're not listening to what the person is saying on the call. You can hear their voice, in the periphery, just like I'm looking into this camera and I can see my little Buddha statue on my desk up here, right? That my kids gave me because they equate mindfulness with Buddhism. But so I'm feeding the beast here every day here, right? But I can still see that in its periphery. So I can say, oh, there's this little object here, right? And I know the object well enough that I can say, oh, that's the little Buddha statue, and he's holding this little thing, and that he's smiling and all that stuff, right? But if I didn't know the statue, if it was just somebody talking to me, I would have to stop looking here, and I would have to avert my attention and really see it, right? And so this is the thing about multitasking. It's not real. It doesn't really happen. We can only fully attend to one thing at a time. Now, again, maybe some of these things are skills that it's just the trait of skillfulness, like driving a car. Like we can be driving the car and talking to somebody, no problem. We can even be looking at the scenery around us, no problem, right? We should never do it, but a lot of people even get their phone out and send a text while they're driving. And the reason people do is because mostly they get away with it, right? But in that moment that something happens, they're not attending and they get into an accident, right? And that's what I'm talking about here. Okay. So how do we accomplish this ability to attend to the present moment? Again, it's about practice, okay? And one of my favorite practices, and I have taught people, I've taught hundreds of people over the last 4 years, all kinds of ways in which to work with these practices, right? Some people do better with formal meditation than others. Some people do really well with kindness practices than others, right? But the one practice that has benefited everyone, and there are many people who have said, I can't do meditation. I don't want to do kindness practice. I don't want to do any of that stuff. It's uncomfortable. This practice has changed things for them immeasurably in ways that they cannot even believe, okay? So 3 to 4 times a day, I want you to do this, okay? Now, please send me an email if you want written instructions for this, okay? I'm giving them out for free, okay? I'm an old deadhead, so it's like my bootleg tapes, right? So just let me know if you want one. I'll send you, okay? 3 to 4 times a day. And in the beginning, it's going to take maybe a minute to do this, right? Maybe 2 minutes tops. But eventually, it just becomes a fluid, process you're not stopping what you're doing to do this. It's like it's just happening, and it happens automatically, right? But in the beginning, first few weeks, we got to really be intentional about it and really do this practice. And this state that we get into each time we do this for a minute or two at a time becomes the trait that no longer requires the actual practice, quote unquote, okay? So what you're going to do is so simple. You're going to check in with yourself, okay? Because at any given moment in time, your body, your emotions, and the thoughts that are happening in your mind are happening right now. Those things never happen in a time that's not right now. You might be thinking about something that's not now, and that, the thing that you're thinking about might make your emotions might elicit certain emotions, which then make your body feel a certain way. But the whole process is happening right now. Never otherwise. Never even once. Okay? It's impossible unless you've invented a time machine or something like that. Okay? So what you're going to do is you're going to check in with the body, the emotions, and the thoughts. Okay? So the first step is the body. Now, I encourage people to check in first with their chest and their face and even their throat, right? This is where we feel most of the emotions in our body, right? And so check to see, do you feel tension in your chest? Do you feel like there's like a lump in your throat kind of feeling? Do you feel like, like catchy in your throat? Is it easy to swallow or hard to swallow? And do you feel a tension around your eyes and your forehead and your cheeks? Do you feel like you're scrunching? Or do you feel relaxed and expansive? And there's no right or wrong way. That's not the point. The point of this practice is not to achieve a state of relaxation. The point is to achieve a state of awareness of what it is you're going through right now. So first we check in with our body, the chest, the throat, the face. Now, and now I say that's where you start. You can feel everything, right? Eventually you're going to feel everything, right? So don't limit yourself, but start there, okay? Next, you're going to check in with your emotions. And very briefly, like we're not talking about like this deep investigation of every single emotion I'm feeling right now, but more in the sense of like, am I feeling generally positive emotions like hopefulness and excitement and thrill? Or am I feeling like a negative emotion of forlornness or worry or trepidation or tension and pessimism and things like this? Tension isn't really emotion. Sorry about that. That's the next, or that's the previous step of the body, right? Now you're gonna check in with your thoughts. Now this is where everybody says, "Well, Art, I'm thinking about my body and my emotions." You're right. Yes, right. So what you want to do instead is not examine what you just were thinking about, but instead pause for a moment. And again, this is where in the beginning, it's going to take a minute or two to do this practice, but eventually it's just something that happens as you're going along, right? And just for a moment, just pause and notice what arises in the mind as you're pausing, right? Notice, is there a story that's saying something? Notice, is there a pessimistic notion to the thoughts? Is there a catastrophizing sense to the thoughts? Is there a self-critical and self-blaming essence to the thoughts? Or is it somewhere in the opposite direction, right? Now, again, it's not one being better than the other. Remember, this is non-judging awareness. Because what we start to understand is that the body, the emotions, and the thoughts are just a response to what we're experiencing. And so when you're out with your friends or family and you're having a great time, you're going to experience positive feelings in your body, positive emotions, and positive thoughts. But when you're in a place where you feel like you're wearing too many hats and you're all, bogged down and overwhelmed, it's going to be very negative. And of course, I've only named the two poles here. There's a huge range in between. So it's never about achieving a certain state of being, but rather noticing the state that we're in, okay? And then this awareness, this non-judging awareness, is the state that we're cultivating that then becomes the trait of our personality, all right? I hope that made sense to all of you. I know I went a little longer than we usually plan to. I hope that's okay with you. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And as I say, please, please, please reach out to me via email, art@artburnscoaching.com, and I will send you written instructions for this practice, and I will also answer any questions that you have, okay? And of course, if you'd like me to come to your organization and teach this to everyone on your staff, I am more than happy to do so. We can talk about how that works too. All right, everybody. I wish you well, and I'll be back again next week, hopefully on Friday, if the electrical infrastructure allows for it. All right. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.